It's kind of awkward. So our next presenter, I'm very excited to bring up, is Anil Dash. Anil is the CEO of Fog Creek, and they make software that actually we use here with our students called Glitch, as well as one that you might be familiar with in the professional community called Trello. Yeah? Anil Dash, welcome to the stage. Thanks for coming. Fantastic.
And I believe, oh, sorry, I think you're down here.
Got a PDF. There we go. Can you present that? Hey, look at that. Hi, I'm Anil, and I'm not a designer. I've been an entrepreneur, I've been a writer, I've been a lot of other things. My experience is much more in designing systems than in creating design systems. But I wanted to sort of bring a little bit of perspective as somebody that I get introduced understandably as CEO of a software company, which is actually my job. But a lot of my work has been in sort of interrogating the tech industry, being a bit of a critic as much as one can be from the inside, trying to be. And also, my background as an activist, as a writer, and the other roles that I've had. And so trying to bridge those things together, I think, really connects into a lot of the themes we've hit today. And I wanted to give a little bit of background about what it is to be somewhat non-standard within the tech industry, because I say I run a software company, and in culture that sort of means certain things about design, about what happens, but the company I run is small and independent, and yet has impact. So how many of you have ever, if you're coders, looked at Stack Overflow and got an answer? A couple of you, right? Or if you've done project management, if you've used Trello, a couple of hands. And then I understand a lot of you have used Glitch, is that right? So that's cool. So all of those were created or co-created at our company, Fog Creek, and then spun out over time. Glitch is still in home because it's young and little. Yet we've, as a company, never had venture capital investment. We are small and privately held. Our team is 36 people. Most of them are downtown. It's a very, very different thing. And that informs everything about design and everything about our ability to consistently make things that millions of people use. And when we talk about design systems, that's your dream, right? It's to make something that has impact on a lot of people's lives. And what I want to do is share a perspective about having been creating experiences, particularly on the web. Now, this is not to dismiss, I love desktop and mobile software and all the other sort of ways of creating digital experiences. But I'm going to talk about the web because this is something that is different in kind and that we've lost a lot of the history of. And I'm going to talk a little bit about where that history went, why it went away, and also how we sort of reconstructed or an imagined version of it. And I'll sort of zip through a lot of the concepts there around along the way. So the first thing to understand about the web is that it was a folk medium, which is to say we invented our practices for creating and designing it ad hoc amongst each other in the early days of the web. I got on the web in 1992 when it was mostly text and it was less than a year old. And by 1994, I'd seen a graphical web browser and decided this is what I was going to do the rest of my life. I just knew this was something overwhelmingly compelling. And it's wild, that's like a quarter century ago, so I'm incredibly old. But like one of the things that comes out of that is that epiphanic moment of this is how I'm going to express myself. It's like, I'm not a great singer, I'm not a great dancer, but this is the way that I can put myself out in the world. And I don't think that is most people's experience of the web today. It's not a folk medium, it's a box that companies run that you put your stuff into, and if you're lucky, they give your stuff back to you sometimes. That's a very, very different concept of how many of us in the early days of the web encountered the web. And the reason why is very quickly, companies recognized there was a lot of opportunity here, and tech companies in particular are radically anti-historical. They are really aggressively, and this is particularly true of the investors that make most of the large technology companies go these days. They are, and I don't say this lightly, they're not merely inattentive to history. I mean, all of our culture is inattentive to history. They are aggressively, stridently anti-historical. They will try to erase these things. So I'll ask you something. Think about your favorite album that you listen to, your favorite music. Think about your favorite film. Do you know who performs on those songs? Do you know who directed the film? You probably do. And then think about the apps that you've used. And then ask yourself, do you know who made them? I don't mean who's the CEO of the company. I mean, who made them? Like, can you name one person? And now, granted, this is, you're in New York and you're educated designers, so maybe you know that one person and you're connected through LinkedIn or they got a job at one of these companies. But for the most part, billions of people use technologies and have no idea who created them. And then go back to, well, who made these things more deeply? Like, who invented this category of app? And that's where we start to see why there is not a shared culture on the web anymore. We have obliterated the ability to even see who makes this app. There is no IMDb for apps. There is no, what we used to have back in the end of the web, view source. Now, you can still view source in your browser, technically. Sometimes you have to enable the tools to do it. Most mobile devices are abysmal at this. But being able to see how a web page was made used to also give you hints as to who had done so and give you a connection into those creators, right? And it's wild that we've seen so much progress in remix culture, in music and film and all these other disciplines where you can see that history. And sometimes you can glimpse, if you're extremely tech savvy, you can go to GitHub and you can find where some of the pieces and parts were made. But those are the raw materials. That's not the experience, right? That's not the thing you're using. And this manifests itself all the way into the tools of expressiveness. So the tools we use for shared culture these days are generally closed proprietary networks. So like you're all on Instagram, you see the filters. Who made the filters? In their case, those were inherited from originally on the iPhone from iOS. The phone said these are the filters you're going to get. Instagram just made them accessible and easy. But where did those transformations, the math to make those images look that way and to do those effects, where did those come from? A lot of that's public research, right? So you dig deep enough, you can sort of see the academics and the researchers that created those Instagram filters, but you can't trace the line from scholarly research saying these are ways to add effects to images all the way through into the app in your pocket and see how these things are connected. And there's huge loss to that. There's huge loss of potential, huge loss of expressiveness, and huge loss in shared culture, because then you think, well, if I want to make a filter, what would I do? How would I even petition to Facebook, which owns Instagram, to say I have a way of manipulating images that the world should see? It's not designed for that. You're not meant to do that. And I thought about why they're doing this, right? Why do we erect these barriers to creating technology that's participatory, to creating design systems where we can imagine ourselves being part of the design? And it's interesting because the rhetoric of the tech industry broadly is we want to teach everybody to code, right? We want to teach the kids in class. We want to teach everybody in grade schools. Well, they want to teach kids to code if it means they're going to come in and be coders and lower the cost of wages for working at the tech companies. But in terms of actually empowering creativity outside of the walls of the few giant tech companies that have been funded by a couple giant venture capital firms, they're not really interested in that. And I can say that because I've been there and I've done that. And I've built companies funded by those people and I know what they fund. And so you see this sort of sense of, well, we want there used to be a phrase about a decade ago that was sort of moderately popular called user-generated content. And this is such a great, a very telling phrase, because nobody calls themselves a user. No artist calls their work content unless they're being ironic. And certainly the creative act is not generation, right? So I'm not a user generating content, I'm a person expressing myself, right? And so what you do through language is you separate people from the idea that the digital medium is one that you express yourself in, just as you would with words, with poetry, with art, with film, with all the other media that we have in front of us. And this is especially galling because the people who created the first generation of technologies are still alive and still creating vital, interesting technologies. Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the web, very active, still really creative, still has lots of ideas about how the web should evolve. How many of you have ever used a spreadsheet, like Google spreadsheets, Microsoft Excel, like most of you? I love spreadsheets. I'm a nerd. I love spreadsheets. I think they're a really creative, expressive tool if used right. Who invented the spreadsheet? Anybody? Right, you're all smart as hell. You all have access to all the resources in the world. You've all used this tool, and not one of you knows who made it. Isn't that wild? Charles Simoni was definitely somebody influential in creating Multiplan and Excel, the most popular spreadsheets. The inventor of the spreadsheet's a man named Dan Bricklin. And he's pretty young. He's in his early 60s. He's in good shape. He's still making apps. He went on to create some of the first pen computers that helped influence all the way through to the iPhone. The very last keynote that Steve Jobs did when he was showing off the iPad, Dan had built an app for the iPad and went up afterwards and was like, just like I made the first spreadsheet called VisitCalc on your Apple II computer in the late 70s, I made another touch app that people can take notes on the iPad, 35 years later. And there's still that connection. So these are people that are creative, vital, and Dan's been a mentor of mine because I just emailed him out of the blue and he replied back. You can do that. Like the folks that invented, presentation software, PowerPoint, like all these different things, they're still alive and out there and accessible. They want to share their knowledge. And yet we've erected all these barriers. Can you imagine talking to the people that invented the first tools for creating films, for creating television, right? To have access to them and have them alive and not know about it and not be taught it when we're teaching what technology is? We got scammed, right? So I bring this up because I come from the old web. And I don't have some great reverence for it. Like, it's not like the good old days were better. Like, they were crappy in a lot of ways. Like, the tools were primitive. What you could do is primitive. Nobody was there. Like, none of your friends were online. Like, it was like a ghost town. But there were some parts, because they hadn't been locked down, that were really interesting and expressive and really open. There are some interesting vestigial memories where people are familiar with parts of these, where they've heard one or more of these names of old communities that were there. MySpace, LiveJournal, Neopets. I don't know if you all had a Neopets page. Some of you are old enough. I see it. GeoCities. There was a site called AngelFire, similar to GeoCities, where anybody could just sort of put up a web page. Patrick was talking about, what if your content follows your cursor on the screen? On AngelFire, that was the hotness 20 years ago. So everything old is new again. And that's not to say that's not an original idea, but why are there these echoes and we don't know the antecedents to it? Like, why have we been scammed into believing that there isn't a folk tradition of trying these same experiments and carrying them forward? Right? That's the thing we've been divorced from. Think of how much creativity is lost because you can't go back and refer to it. And it's cheap. It's not like you have to have a museum storing the old artwork to be able to refer back to it. That, oh, I wish I could fly to that city and see that work in person. It's the web, right? It used to fit on floppy disks, right? Like, you can bring it with you. And so where did it go? Is it somewhere in the web archive? Probably. But how do you get to it? How do you make it accessible? Why has it been erased? Why have we been separated from it? These are really important questions when we think about how to express ourselves. A lot of the work our team is doing now with Glitch is about explicitly trying to bring back these kinds of communities where people are helping each other create. And it's a little rough around the edges, but you can try out new things and learn different ways of expressing yourself. And I think about this a lot as the web we lost. And again, I'm cautious about saying this because there's this sentimental or nostalgic view of the good old days were better and you could do all these things. I don't believe that. I think that the best days of the web and digital expressiveness are ahead of us. But there are elements of this that we have to be informed about, that we have to know to feel the loss of culturally before we can bring them back. The wildest thing about this is I talk about those sites that some of you may have not heard of any of them. Some of you may vaguely heard of one, maybe never tried any of them or built anything. Millions of people did, though. Millions of people did. It wasn't billions, but most sites don't have billions of users. But millions of people liked a band enough to make a fan page on MySpace. Millions of people had to get out their emo thoughts by making a LiveJournal blog, or millions of people wanted to just put up some art project on GeoCities or these other sites. Like, these were common behaviors. These weren't obscure, things that only geeks did. And back then, the people creating were much more inclusive communities by gender, by race, by class, by all the other indicators that have been squeezed out of who gets to make technology in the industry today, right? So we come back to how you have that priesthood build up the temple around it to keep people out. What we've done is also erase the fact that we were always here. All the rest of us were always here, creating things on the web and using it to express ourselves. And that's something that I think we can reclaim. I mean, I look at this crowd and it looks a little bit more like New York City, which is good. But we look at who's actually building the apps that dominate our digital experiences today. And it's like, it doesn't look like this room. It doesn't look like this city. That's a big gap to be filled. The other part is that there are billions more on the web now and using apps every day that never knew about this history. And I don't care if they know about any of these websites. Like, I'm not really interested in, well, you should find out about this old site that, people used to put their NSYNC fanfic on. Like, I think what's more interesting is to say, this is a medium that used to be expressive, and to claim that, and claim that for yourselves. Like, you all have something to say, and can you share this idea that these are expressive tools, these are expressive systems? I think that's one of the things that I sort of beseech you all to be voices for. When you think about design systems, not merely can people understand this message, but can they see it as participatory? Is it something you create in negotiation with the community you serve, with the people you serve, with the audience you serve, as opposed to something delivered to them? And think about business models. Now, this is something where, like in an art school, in a design context, you're not supposed to talk about this stuff too much. You're supposed to free your mind. Let me tell you something. The thing that is going to constrain your art is the business models of digital platforms. Period. Your ability to express yourself is going to be locked down by this, unless you understand it. And typically what happens is you come out of here and you have great ideas, and you get a gig because you got to pay off your school loans. And you go through and you end up finding yourself 5 years down the road saying, I can't really express myself the way I want. I have these ideas that I can't get out there. And it's about fluency and understanding the business context and which you're able to work. I'm not saying this as like some unapologetic capitalist. I'm very conflicted about being a CEO in tech. But it's the thing I wish I had known earlier in my career to understand why I couldn't build some of the things I wanted to build. It's not saying they're all evil. Like, there's great things. Like, it's amazing that I can send a WhatsApp message to my cousins on the other side of the world and know what's happening in their lives. And that is a triumph of good design. That is a triumph of accessibility. That is a triumph of technology doing what it's supposed to do. But we have a world where the predominant business model of large-scale internet platforms is surveillance capitalism. They monitor what you're doing, they surveil it, and they sell either your data or abstractions of your data to other companies and allow those networks to be manipulated by actors, as we've seen in media, press, everywhere else, in ways that are bad for society. That tension is going to have to be resolved. There are going to have to be other models. And that's necessary for society, it's necessary for politics to succeed, it's necessary for like healing the public sphere, but it's also necessary for expressiveness, right? We have a generation of people that think, the primary way you get a message out is you go to Facebook and the page is going to be whatever shade of blue and white you want it to be. Right? It's like the internet can be whatever you want it to be. And we have our default templates of how we think communicating with each other online works. And those are very recent assumptions. Those are very fragile assumptions. Those are things that you can blow up really easily, and maybe you should. And I think about this because I think what we have in the digital realm is not emotionally sustainable right now, right? Whether it's like FOMO on Instagram or like the nonstop noise on Twitter or like all kinds of drama in different Facebook groups, like the ways we interact with each other online are not sustainable. They are emotionally draining. They don't nurture our souls in the way that good art and good expressiveness does. Right? And you think about, it's very easy to put in your headphones and listen to a great album or listen to a great song and lose yourself in it, right? And to be, swept away in the world of a film for a few hours is like a great joy. Or to lose yourself in a book. And then think about your digital experiences, right? And I don't mean when Netflix gives you a film that's a great film. I think like an actual experience of the web or of an app. And how often has it been immersive? How often has it been expressive? How often have you felt like you understood somebody else better? How rare is that? That is not imaginary or impossible. There's nothing intrinsic about the internet that precludes it from being that thing. We've seen already these really interesting and evocative visuals and design elements and ways of expressing ourselves in code that could be, if we nurture each other, every bit as expressive and every bit as meaningful as the greatest art and the greatest expression we see in other media. There's no reason it can't be the same. And there's an interesting intersection here where we have this sort of emotional sustainability, our wellness as individuals, our need to be connected with each other artistically and expressively, as well as this idea of like critiquing the business models. Like there's nothing that says that large internet companies couldn't be thoughtful. There's nothing intrinsic about that. It doesn't limit their ability to succeed in whatever their metrics of success are, except that we haven't pushed them in that. We've forgotten to. And we can point to these prior examples. People empowering millions and millions of people to create and having that be the sustenance of how they make something meaningful online. They made design systems that were not top down, but bottom up, right? That were participatory. There's no reason we can't do that again. And I sort of want to close with a reflection I've been having a lot, which is that so much of the framing of what technology should be, of criticizing technology mindfully, is based on this, like I said, that good old days idea, or this idea that there's this history we need to get back to. And all histories are fiction, right? Like we construct them, and the winners write them. And so I don't want to pretend that there is some one truth that you go back to that you can carry forward that is going to solve all these problems. But what I look at is the idea that all of you collectively in a community like this can create a new history, a new version of that past to reflect on and to use as a basis for making something in the future that delivers the promise, which is why we all got interested in designing things together in the first place. And with that charge, I leave you to the work, and I can't wait to see what you create. Thank you.